talking about a service mocking framework called Dyson. So a quick overview of Dyson is as I mentioned, it's a service mocking framework. It's used to help be able to mimic specific server responses and be able to utilize that for testing purposes in development. It's built on top of Express, so if you're familiar with any Node HTTP service before, Express is typically used in most of those. It also supports static and dynamic responses, so you can take a static response and be able to recreate that response every single time on every page load. You can also use dynamic responses in order to take in inputs from the browser and then determine what kind of response to show to the user. It's also extremely easy to set up. We'll go through this later, but it's by far one of the easiest mocking frameworks I've used to set up. So about the package itself, I have a link to the GitHub page. It's open source, so that's very nice to be able to dig into the code if you want. It's written by Lars Kappert. He goes by WebPro, so if you want to check out his email is on this link. He also is on Twitter, and they're also very, very responsive on their GitHub issues page. So definitely feel free to reach out to them. So a high level as to how it works is it generates endpoints using configurations for each of the HTTP verb folders. I'll get into that a little bit more later. It listens at a particular port, in this case 3000 unless configured to be otherwise, and for requests, and performs a URL match on that incoming request. So if the URL matches one of the endpoints, it will execute one of those functions, and then it will perform create the response as defined in your configuration file. We'll cover how this works in more detail in a later video. I'm hopefully going to be able to record that today, so you should see that very shortly. For installation, because it's an npm module, it's as simple as globally installing the package. This makes the executable available to your command line. So as you should be familiar with by now, npm install-g Dyson will make that available globally. Optionally, you can also install the generators that produce mock datas for names, addresses, and the like. They actually have quite an extensive set of generators, such as addresses and zip codes. You can specifically do US zip codes versus foreign zip codes. It's pretty impressive. To do so, you do an npm install --save dev to save that to your package for dev dependencies, Dyson generators. Next, we're going to cover the folder structure of a Dyson mock. To generate a new Dyson project, it's actually very simple. There used to be a command called Dyson init, but that's being deprecated. So currently, how you do that is you create a directory that you intend to store all your mock in. In that directory, you'll create a new directory for each of the HTTP verbs you'll intend to use. So get, delete, post, put, and options are ones supported right now. You can optionally add a dyson.json file into the directory for further configuration of Dyson, and we'll get into that in the other video. Dyson will generate an endpoint for each of the exported modules per file. So you're exporting node modules in this case. The URL defined in each of these modules will apply to the HTTP verb that they're stored in. So you can have two of the same URLs, but have them accessible via different HTTP verbs, such as post and get. Subdirectories are also allowed under each of the verbs. They have no impact on the URL HTTP verb pair. So if you decide to nest a set of get endpoints in a nested folder in the get verb, it will still be accessible at the URL that you define it in with no further directories added to it. Next, we're going to cover the basic endpoint configuration object. Each file should have a single module.export statement exporting a configuration object. Configuration properties are path, which is the URL to be listened to for requests, template, which is a function or an object to be returned as a response to the server. And with these two properties, a completely static set of mocks can be made. There actually is no necessary properties other than these two, and getting this up and running is extremely simple. Next, we're going to cover how to create dynamic responses. Dyson allows for highly customizable responses. You can do dynamic templates, which takes in a function matching this signature here. The first parameter is path parameters. We'll cover those a little bit later. query variables, and the post body if you have a post endpoint. So the returned object from this function is sent to the calling client as the response. If a promise is returned in this function, the resolves value of the promise is sent to the client. How to do path variables in Dyson is pretty simple. If you are familiar with state provider or UI router, it's the same exact definition. A preceding colon and then the variable name in the path variable will make a path variable to be accessible in that function. So these portions of the URL can be changed dynamically from the client, and Dyson will still match the URL. So you can pass anything into these variables as long as they're valid escaped URL characters. Next, we're going to cover query variables, which, if you're familiar with the web, it's the question mark and then the key value pair, and it'll accept any query variables and you can access them in that function. Next is the post body. If you have a post endpoint, the body sent by the client can be accessible in the Dyson configuration, and you can choose to act on that and respond differently, which is pretty nice. Next, we can also access HTTP headers. This is a more rare case, but for some applications, they use the headers to make determinations such as the language that's being returned. So you can access the raw request and response objects from Express and actually access the HTTP request headers and make a determination based on that. To do so, we're using the render property on the configuration object, which is a function taking in the request and response, and you actually have to render the response to the client. So you have to say response.send and then the object that you want to send back and then the status code. As always, feel free to contact me on any of my social media and also check out my blog. Next, I'll be actually showing you how to integrate the Dyson mock services with Webpack in the next video.